Hey, everybody. I hope you can see me. I'm Dr. Warren Bird, Leadership Network's Research Director. It's a delight to have you for our discussion about latest multi-site trends with the subtitle, How a New Generation of Pastors is Shifting to Strategies that Reproduce and Multiply. We are delighted to have you. Let me tell you just a quick word about myself. First is you see New York City in the background, and it doesn't quite look like that. It's covered with snow at the moment, and whether you're watching live or by recording, we're so glad to have you. The most important thing to know about me, besides that I've had the privilege through Leadership Network of doing a bit of research on today's topic, is that I love Jesus, I love church planners, I love multi-site campuses. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, it's at Warren Bird. So I am not alone today. I am joined by Jeff Beecham, who is the multiplication specialist at Portable Church Industries. They're the sponsor of our report. What a delight to have worked with them and their team. And I even know a bunch of churches that use portable churches. So they're a great group. Jeff, let me let you say a quick hello. And just a quick question for you, Jeff. Why did you choose to sponsor our two reports?
Well, Warren, it's just terrific to be here with you today and to be able to share some of the findings that you've dug up in this report. Portable Church it's a rather exciting time to be a part of the church in general. There's a lot of neat things that God is doing, and it's a pretty exciting time. At Portable Church, 24 years ago, began the process of serving the church. And there are a lot of professionals out there now that are serving the church by consulting and helping them be the best that they can so that we can reach the unchurched. And Portable Church wants to serve well. So in an effort to be able to understand the church as best as possible, especially in the area of growth and multiplication, Portable Church wanted to be a part of this. So we decided to ante up and be a productive part of this process.
Great. All right, let's jump in, look at the first slide. I'd like to kind of tell you how this report is unique. And the research came by, instead of surveying church planters or surveying multi-site campus pastors, which Leadership Network has kind of led the charge on doing both of those, we thought, what if we try both groups and we kind of compare and contrast how they're different and how their situations are different. So we got 1,500 plus church planners or campus pastors to tell us answers to the same questions, and that's how we frame the report. If I can give any big 30,000-foot perspective, it's that maybe a couple of decades ago, a dream was, let's just grow big, in that let's reach as many people as we can for Jesus, and let's house them in this building. And we figured out by this point in history how to go to multiple services. And then in more recent years, the last decade, that's begun to backfire, and that zoning has said, but you can't build bigger. Or people have said, do we really want to build a huge sanctuary that's only used once a week? So what if we reproduce ourselves? What if we take the church to where the people are? And hence birth not only momentum in multi-site, but further fuel for the church planting movement. So a shift from grow big to grow big and reproduce to today, the big news is grow big and multiply. And what does that mean? And that's actually what I want to take you to in the next slide. So, but before I go to the next slide, sorry, my miscue, I'm going to talk to you about the biggest finding. I'm going to talk to you about the question that we get asked a lot: what size should we launch at? What's optimal launch size? What are some other findings in the report? And we're going to make several stops for Q&A. So the Q&A is going to be done by the chat function. What you do is you just simply type in your question, and at least 2 different points, Jeff Beecham and I will look at what you've got, dialogue, and try to answer whatever you've specifically asked. So just a quick overview. You see from the current slide up there, when we said, okay, as you do in most surveys, tell us about yourself and your church or your campus or whatever. Wow, we got almost half, 49%, were young, under age 40. The median senior pastor age in the United States is like 52. So this was a younger crowd. And then going to the next slide, among others, oh, and were you the founding pastor? Yes, we got a mix, more founders than not. And then looking at the next slide, we also got a mix of portable versus permanent. Portable defined as, you have a truck or something, you go and you set up and tear down. You don't have access to it all week. Maybe you get to store it there on facility, but you don't have full week access. Permanent facility, whether you're leasing it or renting it or whatever, means you can have access to it through most of the week. Now, next slide. The big finding. We ask a whole lot of questions, then we sat and tallied and analyzed and did all kinds of sophisticated statistical stuff. And then, so people say, so what was the big news of the report? It turned out to be this question. So I'm going to unpack this question for the next several minutes, because I think it highlights a lot of what this report represents. So we asked the question, how are you moving towards multiplication? And we gave 6 options, and working our way up, and I reordered the options in the lowest response to the highest response with number 6. So none of the above. You see, it's roughly the same, although the older pastors, several more of them said, I'm not doing anything. So far, the tilt is towards the younger pastor. Next slide, we gave them the option, well, have you trained future campus pastors? And look at this. 1 out of 5, 19%, 24%, 22%, said we have trained a future campus pastor. Now, I wish I had historical data where I could do what they call longitudinal study and say, okay, 20 years ago when we asked the same question, we don't have that, but everything in me says this is remarkable progress. Going up to the next slide.
Well, just if I could say, back in the day,
Jeff, jump in.
Well, back in the day, most of the new pastors were coming out of seminaries or denominations, and that's changing.
Right. The locus of church planting, which exactly as you're saying, has now moved heavily towards the local church. Yep. And that's a definite shift. Next slide says, okay, but what about training future church planters? Now that's slightly higher, in part because church planting has probably been going longer and historically more heavily emphasized than campus pastors for multi-sites. But, that's still 1 out of 5 churches have done that. Very significant. The next slide represents a big jump. We give money directly or indirectly to church planting. Now, so that would be like foreign missions. That would be like, across town, part of my denomination or fellowship. I thought that was going to be the heaviest group. But look at the age breakdown in it. I mean, it is 65%, but it is like right around half have said we give money directly or indirectly to church planting. But the news is, in a minute, we're going to go and see other slides where there's more. But even on this slide, look who the one that's giving the money to. That's giving the money. It's the younger pastors, those that are aged 21 to 39. 2/3 of them are giving money to church planting, whereas the pastors aged 50 and up, only 43%. Wow. To me, I would have intuited, or it would be, you would think that it would be the other way around, but it wasn't. So here again is a tilt towards what the younger pastors and campus pastors are doing. Okay, let's keep climbing this scale. We're intentional in multiplying small group leaders. Okay, that's roughly the same percent as giving money to church planting. But to me, two things to observe. First, it says that people catch the idea that your small group structure is your best way to prepare future leaders, and that you need a small group structure, and that you need a pipeline or pathway for how do we, if God should develop from within our midst, going back to Jeff's comment, not just, calling the seminary and say, who do you have? But raising up our own people, Ephesians 4:11 and 12, equipping the saints to do the work of the ministry. It's the younger pastors who are doing this more than the older pastors. All right, now the final slide. 83% of surveyed pastors, that's lead pastors or multi-site campus pastors, under age 40 have a future vision to plant or launch a new campus or church. That is amazing. I mean, just by definition of being young, that means you can't have been there that long. So here am I in my earlier years of a church, in all likelihood, and I'm already saying we have a vision to plant a new church or to launch a new campus. All right, we'll stay camped on that for a minute, but the next slide kind of brings back all the percentages. To me, okay, this is the only, when you get 83% saying something, you're on to something. And again, I don't have long-term data, but to me, this is an absolute game changer. That if we have 4 out of 5 young campuses or young church plants planning to launch others, the whole landscape is going to change. Even how we plant and what we do. And for Jeff Beecham of Portable Church, many of them will be portable.
Yep.
So let me, at this point, just again point you, next slide, to the report that we're talking about. It's a free download at leadnet.org/portable. And let me remind you, if you've got questions, put them in the chat box. And then Jeff Beecham, we're brought to you by Portable Church Industries, and I will dialogue a bit about it. But to me, this is groundbreaking news of where the future is. In fact, one reporter who wrote about this report, we got lots of good publicity, titled the report, "The Future. This is the future of church growth," and meaning
Warren,
multiplication. All right, next slide, and then Jeff, let's hear your comment, and we'll look and see what has come in.
Well, I was just going to say that I can remember as a young pastor, it was all I could do, I thought, to simply be thinking about my church and how did I grow the people that God was sending me and that we were reaching out to. And I wasn't nearly as mindful about launching new campuses or launching new churches as plants and raising up future pastors. And now there's a new mentality that's out there of multiplication and thinking beyond their 4 walls. And it's very exciting. And I have to say that there's real leaders across the country that have painted that vision and painted it well enough that God has been able to put the seeds of that vision into young pastors so that they can really have a thirst for kingdom growth, not just their own kingdom, but kingdom growth in reaching the lost. And it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it is. And my own church planting, it was all I could do to think about the church. We called it a baby church name, and because we stayed up nights with it, we had to potty train it in effect. Yep. And that and yet somehow today a new generation of pastors is able to lead not only their church but already to be thinking, how am I reproducing myself? How am I multiplying myself? How am I training other leaders? How financially just everything is changing with this with the implications of this 83%.
It's very sophisticated thinking.
Yeah, yeah, and amazing, and having good role models out there makes a huge difference. So one of the questions that came in is someone said, small group structure, I had earlier said, and he's mentioning me, small group structure is the best way to plant and prepare future leaders. Can you unpack that for a bit? Sure. How do you grow bigger? You get bigger by getting smaller. People find their identity not in the whole, but in the smaller group. So going to a football game, it's miserable if I go by myself. But if I go with a bunch of friends and we tailgate together or high five each other during the game and chat about it, debrief it, then frankly, the more the merrier. And you'll have inherent gaps in or barriers to your growth if you are trying to have everyone know each other and find everybody's needs to be met in the large group. By contrast, if you are training small group leaders, that's the best discipleship because it's so manageable. It's a manageable amount of people. If each of them is committed to reproducing themselves through an apprentice or whatever you name the leadership team that you're doing it with, almost the vast majority of churches that have a leadership pathway do multiplicative small groups, and through those small group leaders, then those that shine, maybe begin to coach 2 or 3 other small group leaders, or they reproduce themselves by sending out the leaders to the groups. But this is where the rubber meets the road. If you can't lead a group, if you can't grow a group, if you can't multiply a group, then why in the world would you think you can do that on a larger scale?
Yeah, the local church has to be good at small groups, home groups. And when we work with churches that are planting campuses, we talk a lot about momentum. And if there are some targeted communities where a church thinks that they could make a kingdom impact in, we always encourage them to begin the process of developing small groups in those communities that eventually could lead to pulling together some real good momentum for a new congregation. And new begets new conversions, and new begets new attendees. And new people in new settings promote a new hearing of the gospel.
Yeah, great. All right, let's keep moving. Let's go to the next slide, and we'll have another Q&A time. And punch your stuff in the chat box, and we'll deal with all we can. Question we regularly get is, well, what size should I be to launch? And the answer is different for you depending on what size. Well, let me say it another way. We ask people who had recently launched a new church, what would the ideal size be for launching a new church? And whatever size they were when they launched, on average, they said, well, probably a little bit bigger than what we were. So the church under 100, said on average, well, to plant a new church, we should have been, the ideal would be on average 162, or to launch a new multi-site on average 199. But a church that's 200 in size, well, and that means that they started with that larger size that I just mentioned. They now want it even larger. Well, if we did it again, we'd like to see more. So to me, the lesson is, hey, it's hard work and you can always use more people, but aren't you glad that you launched? And we're going to come to that later in some of the findings, the different launch factors of why it's so much better to launch rather than to wish you did, or to just talk about it. So here are the numbers. If you want them for launching new churches and launching multi-site campuses based on what size people were as they answered the question. And I bet some questions are going to come up that. And Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Well, I was just going to say that when you talk about the size of a church and the number of people that you take to either multi-site or plant, it seems like no matter what we do, we always want more. We want to be better prepared, or we want bigger numbers. But when God sends us and we're faithful to that, God seems to be able to generate the growth. And so it doesn't surprise me that most churches and most campus launches feel like they're not taking enough, and yet God does a great work amongst them. So by all means, this tells me that when God calls you to go, you got to go.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to take some of the questions just briefly to allow those who want to look at this slide to look at it, and also to give clarity to those who have asked. Some said, well, what's the difference between reproduction and multiplication? That's really good. If I plant a church or another church, I am reproducing myself. If those churches reproduce themselves, now I have moved from reproduction to multiplication. And that involves the same with campuses. You know, if I just keep planting multi-site campuses versus if we plant a multi-site campus and it is empowered, encouraged to have a vision to plant other campuses, and the pregnancies just continue, and then we move from addition to multiplication.
And if you're filling the pipeline with leaders that you're eventually going to send out, if they are being implanted with a vision that they're going to plant a church that's going to plant a church, that's very different than just, I'm going to plant a church.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Another question that came in, it seems that microsites are increasingly popular with millennials. How could that pair with a traditional multi-site model? And I'm seeing lots of churches doing the both and. In other words, yes, we'll start with a bang, but if there are these, and what do we mean by microsites? It doesn't have an official definition. There's no one who's championing a particular way to do it, but it's largely an organic, a loose group of between maybe 5 and 30 on average that seeks to do the gospel, demonstrate the gospel, be the gospel to one another, do the one another's 59 one another's of Scripture, which include reaching out. So it's kind of a small church, but it's usually connected with something larger. All right, let me keep
Warren, I'm not sure if you saw this one from Jason. He's asking, are growth rates and long-term success rates different between campus launches versus church plants?
Yeah, okay, let's go to the next slide, and then I'll answer that question. The larger the church, the more likely to be multi-site, and there's some numbers for you. And likewise, the more multi-site you are, the more likely you are to plant churches. There was early discussion of, you know, are these toxic to each other? Do they compete against each other? And actually they fuel each other. So if you're multi-site, meaning having campuses, you tend to be planting churches and vice versa. Now, specifically to Jason's question, what about the growth rates between the two? Actually, campuses, multi-site campuses, have a higher numerical growth rate because they tend to be started larger versus church plants, which may have a higher percentage growth rate. So in other words, if a church plant starts at 50 and they add 50 people, well, that's, you know, I've just doubled. But if I'm a church campus and I'm at 200 and I add 50 more, that's the same number of people, but not the same percentage growth. So I'm going to say something. I'm a former church planter. I love church planting. My heart is in church planting. I totally agree with Peter Wagner's long ago statement that there's no better way to reach people under heaven than plant churches, except to start a new campus. And actually that partnership with Ascending Church, even if eventually the campus that started becomes its own self-standing church, does have a higher growth rate in terms of new people. I wish church planting were neck and neck. It's not quite, but that doesn't mean not to do either. And that's a difficult set of numbers to compare because, again, they're not quite always the same size. I hope in a future study to compare same size units, but haven't been able to do that yet.
Yeah, it's not supposed to be an either or. It's a both and.
Yeah.
There are actually two different kinds of planters. One is when a church sends out a plant and sends out a pastor and some of its congregation as a tithe. And then there's the solo planter who goes out on his own and he begins as small groups and grows his congregation that way. And there's a little bit of momentum when the church sends out a planter with a tithe of people.
Yep. Okay, we've got some more questions. We'll do another Q&A session in just a few minutes, and we'll tackle those. Let's go to the next slide, which is actually not taken from the report, but taken from the book Viral Churches on Church Planting, which in essence says that some trivia that you may enjoy. The average church in America has a rather impressive seating capacity, 240. Now, the average attendance is in the 80s on typical Sunday. But you take the seating capacity, because where I'm going to go on this is if there's this great move of God and everybody wanted to go to church, we're in trouble. And you got 310,000 Protestant churches, which means I got 74 million seats. Now, let's let all these churches have 3 services. Well, now I got 223 million seats. Well, I got a population in the United States of 325 million, which you subtract that out, that's just over 100 million people that there's not room for. Okay, can microchurches handle them? Absolutely. Can, small groups? Absolutely. But if they wanted to do the corporate gathering together, there's not enough room. And whether it's church planting or campusing, there is room for more of them. And just a bit more trivia. In next slide, the people may say, well, at the rate churches are closing, we're on a downward spiral and people are giving up on religion and all this. Well, actually not quite. There are now, as of 2006, more churches planted every year than closed. And those churches that are planted are usually much larger than the ones that closed and much younger in the sense of, reaching young adults, young families, as opposed to the ones closing tend to be older adults. You may say, well, and I've also heard that the average church, doesn't even make it. Not so, according to research that Leadership Network commissioned and that we put in this book by Ed Stetzer and Warren Bird. And that's that the average attendance in a new church's 4th year is 84 people. And that the majority of, 68% of church plants still exist in year 4. And 3 in 10 new churches that become self-sufficient in year 1 financially. 40% in year 2, 54% in year 3, 62% in year 4, and 70% in year 5. So there is a pathway. Finally, 32 months. 32 is the number of months a denominationally supported new church typically receives denominational funding, which is 1/3 to 1/2 of the funding needed. Meaning, the new model is not, we'll give you the money and God bless you, but you need to have skin in the game and raise it, a portion of it yourself. Okay, so next slide. In the report, you're going to see 7 discoveries about younger and new pastors. We're back to the report. I'm teasing you by saying we highlighted the first at the top of this webinar, that 83% of surveyed pastors under age 40 have a vision to plant. There are others, 2, 3, and let's go through the next slide, 4, 5, 6, 7. Those are all there in the report for free download for you. And if that's not enough, next slide, there is another report. The earlier report came out, and again, you can find them both at leadnet.org/portable, and it's called 8 Launch Wins, and it's taken from the same study that we did. And if you go to the next slide, let me highlight, a little confusing, 8 launch wins, 5 compelling new reasons to start a new church or campus. And just to summarize them, to tease you into saying, I want to download this report too. You want to reach more millennials? Start a new church or campus. A very significant higher number of millennials and young adults, Generation Z, whatever you want to call those born that are younger than you or me. You want to reach them, start the new campus. You will have more outreach. The new thing, 52% more likely, we asked the question, are your people inviting friends and family to consider faith and Jesus Christ, in Jesus Christ? And in the first 5 years, it was 52% higher than in any other time period. Wow, you want to see more faith decisions, start something new. More engagement. Just this morning, I read a blog by Carrie Newhoff that said that engagement is better than attendance. Attendance is just the outcome of engagement. You know, if you're engaged, then you're going to get involved and be there. You want to increase engagement of people volunteering and the like. You get 31% more people in the first 5 years of a new church or multi-site campus. More growth in the first 5 years of the new financial campus. And depending on how you argue it, more financial resources available to spend in part because you have a higher percentage of new campuses that are portable and use companies like our fine friends at Portable Church Industries. And so instead of paying a mortgage, they've got stuff that they can not only use in their current building, but then if they outgrow it or something, they don't have to sell and build and go through all that. They just move the stuff to the next place and change some of the pieces, perhaps.
Well, and also the per seat cost is a lot less expensive in your first 5 years than after that first 5 years. It almost triples or more after the first 5 years, the cost of having someone in that seat.
Right. Your startup cost may feel like a chunk of change, but look at your ongoing cost, especially if you have a building, and it's much higher. Okay, we're about to come to the Q&A. We'll go to the next slide, which just recommends some books, and then put in the chat box, and we'll try to get to your questions. Jeff Beecham from Portable Church Industries and myself, Warren Bird from Leadership Network. Hero Maker, released in early 2018, talks about 5 practices, very practical things that you can do.
It's a great book.
In order to move toward multiplication wherever you are. You say, hey, I just got to learn how to stop the decline and get even, or we need to just start growing. These practices can help you cross all of those thresholds. The book Exponential by Dave Ferguson, it basically says, you know, how do I reproduce myself as 1? How do I reproduce a group? That's 10. How do I reproduce a church or cluster of groups that would be reproducing 100? How do I reproduce 1,000? How do I reproduce movement? And then the late 2017 publication from Exponential called Multipliers Leading Beyond Addition by Todd Wilson. That too has a lot of practical ideas about multiplication. And do look at the Leadership Network book line of 50 plus books at leadnet.org/books, and you'll find lots of very specific books on how to move to multiplication. All right, one more word about me and Jeff, and then we'll go to your questions. If you want more research, next slide highlights leadnet.org/salary. If you want to participate in the large church salary report, if you're interested in global megachurches, go to leadnet.org/world or leadnet.org/megachurch or intern. That was our second most popular download in 2017, the project we did on internships and residencies. right there for you. If you're Canadian, O Canada, go to leadnet.org/Canada. And final slide before our questions, the way to keep in touch is me on Twitter at Warren Bird, email at research@leadnet.org, or our email that's free with our latest ideas is called Leadership Network Advance at leadnet.org/advance. Jeff, you tell them how to get a hold of you while they're typing into the chat box with their questions.
Yep, our website is real easy, portablechurch.com, www.portablechurch.com. And if you really want to email me directly, jeff.beecham@portablechurch.com.
Great. Okay, so our final slide in essence says, what are your questions? And there are a bunch in here, and so we'll tackle as many as we can, and then we'll land the plane. Starting with is there any data on growth and success of church partnerships through mergers? I did a book with Jim Tomberlin called Better Together, and basically the old model of a dying church finding another dying church and the two of them holding hands continues to fail. But there's a new model where a lead church and a joining church come together, and the joining church takes on the DNA of the lead church, and there are huge successes being reported by that. That also occurs with campuses and church plants that say, hey, we reached out to this community for 3 years. There were shifts in the community or the leadership or something. We're going to merge back into this, or there's another church that's doing a great work in that community, and for the benefit of the kingdom, we're going to merge together. It's fun to see all the combinations that are happening. Go ahead, Jeff.
Well, I was just going to say, one of the other questions has to do with what size does a multi-site need to be viable and have longevity? And I was just going to speak to that a little bit. We have found that in order to gain some momentum, some good numbers that some of the coaches and consultants are suggesting they're finding success in larger congregations being able to send out 200 or 15 to 20% of their congregation to a new area gives really good momentum. But what I would not want to discourage some of the smaller churches. I've always seen that the larger churches amongst us, and I pastored in the shadows of Willow Creek, and I watched what was going on there, and I learned a lot from them. And I've always seen the larger churches, and I viewed them as the R&D of the church. They had the resources and the ability to test some things and to try some things and to risk and to be innovators. And once the larger churches got some of the kinks worked out, that meant all of us in the smaller churches were able to then take some of those principles and grow the kingdom as well in our neighborhoods. And I see that happening with the size of multi-sites, that we've got churches of 400 and 500 that are sending out 100 and 125 people and are finding great success. So I would not limit it to having to be a big church in order to take part in the multiplication process.
Yeah. And the books that I wrote on Multisite, co-wrote with Greg Ligon and Jeff Surratt, Multisite Church Revolution, Multisite Church Road Trip, highlights the low-risk model as one of the models you can do. So you don't have to go gangbusters, and you can learn. But back to the big finding of this research, the 83%, I think that this means we're going to have more experimentation and more innovation. And actually what Leadership Network is all about is we're not about size so much as we are about churches trying innovative things to make more and better disciples of Jesus Christ. And we try to track innovation and the innovation trends that can be followed. And I am absolutely convinced that whether it's the microsite model that was mentioned earlier in one of the questions, we're going to have a whole lot more experimentation and a whole lot more permission to say, no, we tried that, it didn't work in our area or whatever, so we're going to try something else. and that's really okay, as in order to stay on mission and find, what is it that God seems to want to bless for our church in this season at this time, as we try to reach more people. But if the core idea is we're forever training up leaders who have a burden and passion to make other disciples of Jesus Christ, who in turn make other disciples of Jesus Christ, who in turn make other disciples, you can't go wrong.
Yeah, it's really exciting to see the innovation that's taking place. And one of the questions is asking about which model seems to be working best with video or live teaching or a combination or multiple pastors. And really, we haven't seen that there's a bad model. The only bad model is when people aren't doing anything. That's the terrible model. But we see a lot of models and a lot of ways that churches are engaging in new neighborhoods and new locations, and all of them seem to be prospering well.
Yes. Now, you can do either model badly.
Yes.
I've been to a multi-site church where the sight line, you had to just crane your neck where this was video teaching was done, and there were just some other things that were just very poorly done, whether it was a campus or a church plant. And sure enough, a year later, they said, "Oh, it didn't work," and I wasn't invited in that conversation, but I want to say, no, you didn't work the model you had too much toxic in how you did the model. What we've learned from, and you can go to Leadership Network, leadnet.org, and just type in the search bar scorecard, and you'll find the Generis Leadership Network multi-site church scorecard. And one of the findings from that research was what's happening with video teaching. And on average, it's a third do in-person teaching, a third do video teaching, and a third do a combination of the both. But the more sites you have, by far, the more likely you are to use video teaching. So a church with 4 sites, 8 sites, 12 sites is much more likely to use video teaching.
Warren, one of the questions here is, what is the best metric to measure health at a new multi-site church or a new plant once it's launched? And you might have some different thought than me, but really the metrics aren't different from a sending campus versus a new campus. You're still concerned with reaching the lost. Discipling, are you discipling? Are you engaging people? And the more people you can engage, and one of the positive things about portability is that you need more people in order to be portable church, and that engages.
Yes, and when I planted a church, and we carried the Bibles and all that, I wished years later when I learned about portable church, if only we could have had it easier operation. It would have taken less muscle, and there would have been more fellowship, more outreach, more things happening, because the process would have been easier. That said, our multi-site research and other research, to me, the biggest surprise of our multi-site research, which was such a surprise, I ask it in a subsequent questionnaire, and this is all found in this scorecard document that I mentioned, is we ask, when you added another campus, did lay involvement go up, stay the same, or go down? And 87, 89%, I mean, it was a really high number, said it went up. Mm-hmm. And back to your health thing, Jeff, in answering that question, to me, an absolute metric to track is how many of our people are meaningfully involved in ministry. Absolutely. And inherently, when you launch a new campus or church, you have that. Then the question is, can you really sustain that in a way that continues to become a discipleship process from day one? Actually, if it is a discipleship process and the doing of ministry is an outgrowth to the discipleship, it will continue. If it's filling slots and doing jobs just to have them done, it doesn't become discipleship and doesn't continue.
Right.
But those first few years are just so critical for setting the DNA and then sustaining it as a church.
I would
Jeff,
also,
as you're adding, I'm going to look to see if there are any other questions we haven't dealt with, and then we will land the plane and invite people to go to our respective websites and get lots more helpful information.
I was just going to suggest that you converse to that last conversation. You have to be careful that when you are in a portable setting or a plant and you are ready to go into a permanent setting, you have to figure out what you're going to do to keep all of those volunteers that were engaged in a more temporary setting engaged in the more permanent setting, because there's a lot of people that might be on setup crews or preparation teams that don't find a home once you go permanent, and you have to find ways to keep people engaged, and especially engaged in a growing method.
Yeah, very helpful. All right, one last question. I think it will be our last question. Then, Jeff, I'll invite you to make a final comment. Have you seen churches successfully cross socioeconomic and racial lines when planting a new campus? Or do churches stay within their own niche demographic? Oh, this is such a great question, and so important as our society becomes more diverse, and Canada is already more diverse, and other countries and areas are. A secret about large churches, in terms of size groups, they are the most diverse of any size group. So in other words, a church of, say, 2,000 and higher will have more ethnicity on average than a church, say, in the 500 to 999 range. But within the big church, you often wonder, do the Filipinos hang out with each other, and do the African Americans, how much true colorblindness and culture blindness is there in the gatherings. And the wonderful thing about churches that plant or start campuses is you become like, and you target whatever neighborhood you're going in. So this is a much more Hispanic neighborhood, and you have people who either are themselves Hispanic or have great connections and affinity in that group, and wanting to be part of it. And this campus becomes more Hispanic in flavor, and that influences the whole, and it's just a wonderful thing. The same works with economics. Some campuses or churches, but more so with campuses, we say, you know what, that's an economically challenged section of our county or whatever. We are never going to expect that it will fully pay for itself. But because we've got momentum as a whole, we can underwrite the difference because the gospel is underrepresented, assuming so, in that community. And that's the joy of the partnership of being able. Now, other campuses may have the expectation, hey, you need to be self-supporting by year blank or by month blank. And, how do you work towards getting there? And almost every church I know, by the way, does track not only what service does, how much the offerings that they count, does it come from the first service, second service, but also from different campuses, which is very helpful to know as well. So you want to broaden the ethnicity or the economic range of your church, plant a new church or campus. Jeff, anything to add before we sign off?
The only thing I could think that I would want to share is a story about you, actually. A couple of years ago, you said you came out of a meeting with some of the largest church leaders from the largest churches in North America, and you were so excited because they were coming to the conclusion that the church needs to figure out how to go faster and cheaper than they have been. And it's really an exciting time for that. And I would challenge all the leaders, certainly on this broadcast, but also all of the national leaders as they begin to talk about this, that they figure out how do we go faster and more effectively, and how do we go cheaper so that we can reach the lost and win this game. I think God has something special in mind for that.
I totally agree. And this, back to the key finding of the report we highlighted today, if 83% of young pastors are on a regular basis exploring how do we not just start new things, but how do we multiply them,
Yep.
that very goal is going to be achieved, and some exciting times are yet ahead.
Yep. Thanks for your great work here, Warren.
Hey, and thanks for Portable Church's partnership. So leadnet.org/portable. It's been great to have you. This has been recorded. If you want to refer someone to see it, it will be on the leadnet.org/portable page. And it's our joy to put tools in your hand so that you can make more and better disciples of Jesus Christ. Great. Thanks so much for being part of us.
God bless.